Hey, U.S. history. All right, I'm going to make this bigger. All right, and we're going to talk about the Supreme Court a little bit, some controversial stuff with the Supreme Court. And then we're going to talk about Ronald Reagan. Um, so, let's see. All right, first we're looking at the Supreme Court from 1969, so that's the beginning of the Nixon years, to basically the middle of the Reagan years, almost 2/3 through the Reagan years. All right, so Earl Warren had been the Chief Justice from 1953, I believe, to 1969, and the Supreme Court was really liberal during that period of time. It passed, it did some, we've talked about Brown versus Board of Education. I believe we also looked at a couple of criminal cases, Gideon, Miranda. So Nixon was a Republican, and so he nominated this fella, Warren Burger, to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he was a Republican, but the court continued to be what we would call liberal. Most of the rulings, Democrats still kind of liked. So we're going to look at a couple of those court cases then. All right. So it's a Republican Supreme Court, Republican-led Supreme Court, but it kind of acts like a Democrat Supreme Court, kind of like Nixon kind of acted like a Democrat when he was president. All right. So here's the court case. Roe versus Wade. All right. The state of Texas had a law against abortion. And it wasn't just Texas. I would say about maybe 20 states had a law against abortion. And the court had ruled that in another case, Griswold versus Connecticut, you've seen down here, that married couples had the right to use birth control. Connecticut had been a Catholic state, and they had a law against the use of birth control. And so the Supreme Court had ruled in the 60s that the right to an abortion that the right to use birth control was a private matter between a man and a woman, between a married couple. Birth control pills, or you can have a surgery done to make sure that there's going to be no more kids. That's the married couple's business. It's not anybody else's business. And so the Supreme Court called that the right to privacy. They said it was implied by the Third Amendment. You remember that? No quartering. The Fourth Amendment, no unlawful search and seizure. The Ninth Amendment, power to the people. Just because a right's not listed doesn't mean you don't have that right. Part of the 14th Amendment. So if I was to ask you, hey, does a married couple, when you get married, once you have 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids, however many kids you have, do you have the right to start using birth control? And you'd probably say, yeah. And I'd say, well, what if I don't want you to? And you say, well, it's my business. It's my own private business. So we kind of believe in a right to privacy. If I said, hey, can I see all your messages on your phone? You'd say, well, heck no. So you got the right to privacy. All right, but then in 1973, in Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court ruled that what was growing in a woman's body was her own private business. And for that reason, no state could outlaw abortion. So the right to an abortion that still exists, so abortion has been legal since 1973, is based on the right to privacy that the Supreme Court kind of spelled out in that Griswold case. Okay. Enough. Sorry about that. I don't know what to do about that thing down there at the bottom. I'm sorry about that. So I'll read it, and you can decide if you want to write it down. But affirmative action is a program that was created in the late 60s under Nixon, and it encouraged government It was the government encouraging employers to hire minorities, encouraging colleges to admit minorities to their colleges. And it was kind of controversial. So, I mean, the Civil Rights Act, people felt pretty good about the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, but affirmative action became kind of controversial. And so in this case, the University of California versus Bakke. This guy right here, his name is Bakke. But he had been an astronaut. And he retired from NASA and he applied to medical school at the University of California. And he didn't get in. All right, so he says, dang, I had real good test scores. I had good grades. I was in NASA. How could I not get in? And so he started looking at the qualifications of some of the people that did get in, and he found out he was more qualified than some of them were. But the ones that he was more qualified than that got in were minorities. And so he said that was reverse discrimination. And the Supreme Court agreed with him, and they forced California to admit Bakke into their medical school. Now, the Supreme Court said that California's affirmative action program had been reverse discrimination, but they didn't go so far as to say that affirmative action itself was reverse discrimination. And so affirmative action is still kind of around, it's still kind of controversial. Okay, so there's your court cases. I'm going to breathe a second. All right, and then let's go with Reagan here. So we got a couple of headings on Reagan. Okay, Reagan was a former Democrat. He was a Hollywood actor. He hadn't been a great actor. He hadn't been a really, really successful actor. If I can get my cursor going. Do I have a cursor somewhere? Apparently not. But if you look down there at the bottom right hand, there we go. There it is. There it is. Down here, bottom right hand corner. So there's one of his movies. So I mean, he's playing some guy's hanging out with a monkey. So if you're not some great actor, but a fairly successful actor. Then he went into politics in California, and he got elected governor of California during the 1960s while the hippies are kind of marching against Vietnam. At that point, he had been a Democrat. He had supported the New Deal during the Great Depression. But in the 1950s, he became a Republican. So he was a Republican governor of California during the 60s. All right. He got elected in 1980. He beat Carter. Remember, Carter was the president from Georgia. At a debate, he pretty famously asked, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Can you buy more at the grocery store than you could 4 years ago? Is America more respected than it was 4 years ago?" So if things are better, you ought to vote for Carter. But if they're not, if the answer to those questions are no, you ought to vote for me. So he ended up winning, beat Carter. And he was kind of a different kind of Republican. He didn't like taxes the way Republicans traditionally hadn't liked taxes. But he also had the support of a group of people called the New Right, who were really in favor of traditional values, and they were against abortion. So Roe v. Wade was 1973. Kind of took politicians a little while to figure out what they thought of abortion. But by the time Reagan gets elected president, he's decided, and the Republican Party has kind of decided that they don't like abortion, that they're going to be an anti-abortion party. He was also really good at, so he's good in front of the camera. So the fact that he is, and there, come on, where is it? There. All right, so he's good at looking like a real American, got the cowboy hat going there. He's got a real good smile, they perfected. He's also was really good at appearing patriotic. He's got this noble face, noble, pose that he does, and he always made sure flags were behind him. So he's really good at being patriotic, and kind of pro-American. At a time, people were kind of feeling bad about America. So those were kind of the things that helped him get elected president. All right. He's kind of a tough guy. And so when he got inaugurated president, Iran set the hostages free. Remember, the Iran had kept the hostages for over a year while Carter was president. Carter, couldn't get him out, and even the night before he stepped down as president, Carter stayed up all night trying to get the hostages out. And they just left the hostages on a plane on the runway until they knew that Reagan had taken office. And as soon as he took the oath of office, they set the hostages free. So apparently Iran didn't really want to mess with Reagan. All right, at his inaugural address, he's famous for saying, government's not the solution to the problem. Government is the problem in this context. So way back in the Great Depression, hey, maybe the government was the solution, when you had all those people that were unemployed. But in 1981, he says, there's too much government. Government's doing too much. So government is the problem. Now, when he, for a month or so there, 6 weeks, he wasn't all that popular president. Then he gets shot. Now, the guy shoots him. Remember, all these assassins are just weird guys. Guy shoots him. Is a guy named John Hinckley. He's trying to impress an actress. There's an actress named Jodie Foster who's in a movie called Taxi Driver that was about kind of an angry Vietnam vet. So this guy was almost kind of like an anarchist. And he kind of felt like this actress must be kind of like an anarchist because it's kind of an angry movie. So he felt like he would impress her if he shot the president. Well, didn't kill him. And he was just real brave. It got him in like the back and like punctured his lung. And they brought him into the hospital and he was having trouble breathing. And right before they start the surgery, they're putting him out. They're knocking him out. And the last thing he says is, well, I hope you're all Republicans. So he makes a joke, and that's kind of a big deal. If you don't know if you're gonna die or not, and you're able to make a joke, that's a real big deal. All right, grace under pressure, and everybody heard about that. And then he was back to work within 12 days. So everybody, whether they agreed with him on issues or not, they really admired the way he handled that assassination attempt. So from that point forward, regardless of his politics, he was a president that was really personally popular. Everybody liked him. Okay, his economic approach to things, you remember you saw the last slide, he says government's a problem, spending too much money. So he cuts taxes, especially for those that are well off. He wants to get tough on foreign policy, so even as he's taking in less money, he's spending more on the military. He's spending less money on anti-poverty programs, on kind of the Great Society programs that Johnson had passed. So the effect of it was the economy grew, unemployment went down, but, we were spending a lot of money. At the same time, we're cutting taxes, so you had what's called a deficit, spending more money than you're taking in taxes. Also, inequality started growing like it had in the Gilded Age. So the gap between the rich and the poor got bigger. In the cities, gangs became really, really powerful. Businesses kind of left the cities. And cocaine wars between gangs, the Crips and the Bloods, were really, really violent, and crime in the cities was really, really high. Rap music kind of originated in the 1980s as protest music against kind of the gang wars that were going on and concerning the gang wars that were going on in the cities. Okay, so there's our second one. All right, so I'll take a break there. All right, remember what he had done. All right, what office he'd held, what his quote was. And, okay. All right, then here's the third one. All right. The Cold War was still going when Reagan becomes president. And several presidents, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, had tried to kind of get along a little better with the Soviet Union because, we'd lost the war, the Vietnam War, and we'd almost gone to nuclear war in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So they had this thing called détente where they were trying to get along, ease tension with the Soviets. That wasn't for Reagan. He was going to get tough with them, so he called them the Evil Empire. There was a movie, the most popular movie of the 80s was this movie Star Wars with Darth Vader in it, Luke Skywalker. There's versions of Star Wars that have been out in recent years, and so he kind of borrowed the language from that movie. and called the Soviets the evil empire. And like I said in the last heading, spent lots and lots of money on the military. All right. Well, he comes up with this way to win the arms race, he says. We're going to put satellites in outer space, and if the Soviets shoot a nuclear weapon at us, we'll just zap them. We'll just shoot them right out of the sky with these satellites. All right, now, critics said it wouldn't work. So imagine for a second that you're sitting in class, and you're all the American people. And we're going to put, what's tomorrow? Tomorrow is Gold Day. So we're putting Kent. Kent's going to stand up. If I ask for a volunteer, we know it'd be Kent. All right. So Kent's going to stand up, and he's going to climb up to he's going to climb up with this ladder, and he's going to be standing up close to the ceiling. And he's going to have this zapper in his hand, and I'm going to be the evil empire. All right, and I've got like a bunch of magic markers in my hand. I'm going to throw them at everybody. And so he's going to take this zapper thingy that I give him. We'll let him use that styrofoam stored or the fishing pole or something. And when I make like I'm shooting all these missiles at you, he's going to say zap, 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 and he's going to knock them all out of my hand. All right, except one. Now, he's a pretty good shot, but let's say I had 10 magic markers, and he knocks 9 out of my hand. Well, the problem is one still gets through and it kills everybody. All right, so the critics said this is going to cost all kinds of money, and it's never going to be 100% effective. So it's not going to work. Even if it's 99% effective, one nuclear weapon gets through, kills everybody, or kills millions of people. They made fun of it, and they called it Star Wars. They named it after that movie. And they said, he's silly. He thinks you can put these big zappers in the sky. All right. Well, it worked, not because he ever put those things up there. We never put those satellites up into outer space. But the new leader of the Soviet Union didn't like the arms race anymore. So, you remember the arms race. When we had an atomic bomb, they hadn't have an atomic bomb. We built a hydrogen bomb. We talked about SpongeBob a little bit. They had a hydrogen bomb. So they felt like when they put a satellite in outer space, we put one up there, so then we get the space program going. So anytime one side comes up with this big new development, it's like the thing called the Butter Battle book. We kind of saw that. The other side felt like it had to do it. All right, well, Gorbachev felt like if Reagan was going to put one of those things, spend a gajillion dollars on satellites, that he'd have to do the same thing, but he didn't have the money. Soviets didn't have the money. So all of a sudden, Gorbachev starts coming to Reagan saying, look, let's make peace. He tries to, they meet 2 or 3 different times. For a while, Reagan doesn't really want to do it, but they end up signing this big treaty that gets rid of lots of nuclear weapons, like a third of the nuclear weapons. And that pretty much brings the Cold War to an end. All right, so like the historians, kind of argue about who gets credit for ending the Cold War. But here in the United States, Reagan goes down as a great president, top 10 president, maybe a top 5 president, one of the top 2 presidents of the 20th century, Roosevelt and Reagan. Because he has 2 big successes. He has a successful economy, and then he kind of wins the Cold War. All right, last one on him. So some bad stuff happened while he was president. No presidency's perfect. He sent Marines to the Middle East, to this country right above Israel called Lebanon. A suicide bomber killed 200 Marines, and he just pulled them out. It didn't really affect his popularity very much, so people called him the Teflon president. Teflon's this thing you cook with. It's like non-stick stuff that you cook with. And so Democrats said, something bad can happen, but it never sticks to Reagan. It doesn't make him less popular. All right, and then you also had something called the Iran-Contra scandal, where this fella right here, can I get the cursor going? There it is. The guy's name's Oliver North. He did this real complicated thing to illegally, he traded arms. He sold weapons to Iran. And remember, Iran had been our enemy under Carter. And then he takes this money from these secret sale of weapons to our enemy, and he gives it to these counter-revolutionaries in Nicaragua, where communists had taken over. So he's kind of doing cloak and dagger kind of spy game kind of stuff to help fight against communists in Central America. But it was illegal. What he was doing was illegal. And then he claimed Reagan knew about it, that Reagan, either gave the order or knew the order had been given. And so people felt like Reagan was going to get in lots of trouble over it, but it didn't really make him that much less popular. All right, by the end of his time in office, by 1988, conservatives that he appointed to the Supreme Court had made abortion a little bit more difficult. Now, they hadn't gotten rid of abortion, but there's a couple cases. One of them said taxpayer money couldn't pay for abortion, so a lady who wanted to get abortion had to go to abortion clinic, couldn't go, public hospitals wouldn't give abortions. And then another court case said that teenagers, if they wanted abortions, had to get their parents' permission, or if they weren't living at home, they had to get a judge's permission. So it didn't get rid of abortion, didn't really lessen the number of abortions, but it did make it a little bit harder to get an abortion for some women. All right, so conservatives that supported Reagan over abortion were a little bit disappointed that they hadn't really gotten everything they wanted out of that. Okay, there it is. So, go over those right quick. And then what do you think? I think that took 25 minutes. That's my guess. I'm not good at estimating them. I hadn't come within 2 minutes yet on any of these, but my guess is 25 minutes. Let's see.